All right, rolling along here on this Tuesday. 'Tis the football bye week, so we use the opportunity to stretch our legs, spread our wings a little bit, and touch on some other stuff. Hoop season is coming. We just got you with a little Jim Boeheim Day coming down the line. We already had a Gary Gate Day. He got his jersey retired a couple of years back. But Terry Foy is the CEO of Inside Lacrosse. He was in town last week for a first-hand, up-close look at the Orange. Lacrosse is back in the Olympics. Lots of lax in the news here, Terry. It's been a busy week here, considering it's the middle of October.
Yeah, no question. I mean, couldn't ask for more, though, right? The opportunity to find out officially that lacrosse is going to get back on the global stage is about as exciting as news gets. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, came on the back of a trip to Central New York. So I'm in high spirits as far as the world of lacrosse is concerned.
Yeah, you took the full tour of all the Central New York lax hotbeds last week, and we'll hit that in a second. Let's start with this Olympics thing, Terry. I don't think it's necessarily a surprise. Like, once sports kind of get to this part of the vote, they almost always get approved. I think everything that was up for approval on Monday got the check mark and passed through, with baseball and softball and flag football and I think squash, or I don't know, there was a couple other things on there. What does this mean for lacrosse to be on the Olympic stage? I know the World Games are a big thing whenever they come around, but how much bigger is this for the sport of lacrosse to be included in the Olympics?
It depends on where you're from. It depends on what you want to see in terms of the sport's development, and it depends on the lens through which you're looking at it. I think that when it comes down to it, this is the midpoint, but we're at halftime, and that represents a really successful first half of essentially a group of individuals making the concerted effort really over the last 20 years, and then even more focused over the last 5, to get this project done. The opportunity to participate in the Olympics changed materially over the last 20 years when the IOC essentially gave host cities the opportunity to add sports that aren't in the program on an every 4-year basis. And it started in Rio, it happened in Tokyo, it's going to happen again in Paris, and now, you know, we've seen obviously the 5 sports that you named, and cricket is the one in addition to the 4 that you mentioned that is the 5th sport that rounds it out. And they did it for 2 reasons. The first being the IOC has a legacy of essentially not being good for the history of sports in that particular market, whether it's in Montreal or Athens or Rio. And so the notion that this was going to help create sport legacy historically in that particular place by giving hosts the opportunity to pick sports that are relevant to their community was a big part of it. And so lacrosse had a lot to do in order to position itself to be selected. But certainly Casey Wasserman, who is the chair of the LA Host Committee and has been working on it since, you know, the early 2010s when they, you know, originally were trying to bid to be the host in 2024, understands the value of lacrosse in the United States. And clearly it was one of those things where it's like, this is going to be to the benefit of the game. What it means is tremendous international kind of sport financing opportunities in different countries all across the world. And what it means domestically is an opportunity to access fans that are otherwise, you know, might not know about lacrosse, might not know, you know, what it means and everything that's kind of inherent to the sport. So it's the culmination in a lot of respects, and it's opportunity in a lot of other respects.
What the heck is sixes, Terry? Obviously, it's obvious in the name. There's 6 people on the field, but we're used to watching field lacrosse, or, you know, if you watch the NLL or whatever, you know, box lacrosse. What is the actual lacrosse that we'll be watching in the Olympics?
It's a lot like box lacrosse without walls, which sounds dumb, but I have seen it as much or more than pretty much anybody. I got an opportunity to go to Birmingham and watch the International World Games last summer. I spent time in Northern Virginia for the PLL's championship series, and prior to that, there was a Super Sixes event that was men's and women's U.S., Canada, and Haudenosaunee national teams in the fall of 21. And so from that standpoint, I feel pretty well informed in order to, you know, talk about its merits. I think that, you know, if you're a cynic or you don't like it, typically the the pejorative way to describe it is it's a glorified West Jenny drill, which is kind of anybody listening to this that's ever played lacrosse probably is familiar with that drill. And it's 5 short sticks and a goalie. There's no offsides, so the 5 field players can play at both ends of the field. The real reason it exists is because the other part of that legacy of, financial hardship that hosting the Olympics has created is the fact that there weren't limits on the number of athletes that participated, and so it got unwieldy. And so part of this whole reform was to put a cap on the total number of athletes that can participate in the games. I believe it's 10,500. And so the smaller your roster, the more likely it is and the easier it is to include your sport in the Olympics. And so the notion of having rosters of 18 women and 23 men, which, that inequity in and of itself was always going to be a problem, and then protracting that over 4 or 6 teams just made it too heavy of a lift to find room to include it in the Olympics. So over the last 5 years, they developed a discipline in order to have rosters that were small enough where you actually could fit it into the Olympic Games. And so, this discipline is about 3 years old, 4 years old, and it's a 30-second shot clock and a 70-meter field. The goal is 6 by 6, so it's really fast-paced and pretty high scoring. Fatigue matters, strategy matters, but the biggest difference is that if you miss a shot, it goes to the other team. It's a turnover, just as a pass that goes out of bounds would be. And so shooting accuracy is far and away the most important element of the game, and it creates a really precise, kind of type of offense that I think it's going to be really appealing to fans once they give it a chance and sink their teeth into it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. It'll be interesting to see, what players, we're 5 years out, all right, who's going to be in their prime in 5 years that we're going to be getting to watch on the Olympic stage. One last question here on that, Terry, and Terry Foy, the CEO of Inside Lacrosse, is with us. You mentioned that test event you were at last year, and, obviously U.S., Canada will be favorites. You mentioned the Haudenosaunee. Like, they are not, to my knowledge, in the IOC in any way at the moment. Is that something that you have any idea if it's going to occur, that the Haudenosaunee are going to be able to compete in these games?
So the short answer is they are not in currently, and I nor no one knows whether they will be. But the work is being done in order to try to bring about that outcome, and the stakeholders from World Lacrosse up through World Lacrosse's advocates within the IOC down to the Haudenosaunee themselves have all now, in the last 24 hours, publicly said this is worth trying because the potential benefits of inclusion far outweigh the effort, so to speak, that would be required in order to make it happen. If the Haudenosaunee are able to compete underneath their own flag in any form on the IOC stage, it's going to be one of the crowning achievements of certainly Haudenosaunee lacrosse and in many respects Native peoples, in terms of the recognition that would infer from a global community standpoint. And Oren Lyons issued a statement today saying just that. So I think that the questions are how and the number of paths that could be pursued is 2, 3, 4 different paths. And that's what the next 5 years are for solving.
Okay. Well, I'd say the good news that we've seen this in the World Games over the years. Sometimes there's, passport issues and getting, out of the country. At least in the U.S. games, that won't be a problem this time around. But that, there are other hoops, and with the IOC, you never know what the heck they're going to do. So we'll have to see where it all goes down the line. But Terry Foy is with us. All right, let's switch to Syracuse here. Terry, you were here last week. Gary Gait, year 3, ramping up. What'd you see? What popped to you? What were the top things that caught your eye?
I think it's hard not to just listen to the interviews that I conducted and posted and what they said. It's a new vibe. And I think that's a reflection of a handful of things. The first is all those freshmen that were big-time contributors last year are now sophomores, so they know what to expect. They have a year under their belt. The second thing is they brought in a handful of really talented, highly successful grad transfers, whether it be, a pair of Princeton midfielders in Sammy English and Jay Stevens, who made it to a Final Four, or Christian Moulet, who's been to an NCAA tournament as an attackman for Lehigh. And then the last thing, and it's certainly noticeable, is the absence of Dave Petramala and the arrival of John O'Derna as defensive coordinator. And I think that the new vibe is hard to describe, but I think one of the elements that I was told numerous times is unified, right? Where maybe last year practice was a competition between the offense and the defense. This year it feels much more like one team. And I think that the function of those freshmen and the other newcomers, their talent and comfort created a pace in practice that was really remarkable. The portions that I saw were exclusively one end of the field. I didn't see any transition one end of the, from offense to defense or anything like that. But even within 6-on-6 or 5-on-5 or extra man or man down sets, the speed with which the ball was zipping around and the speed with which the defenders were reacting was truly noticeable, and far and away the most substantial takeaway that I had from the time that I was there.
No, that's good. We know that's obviously something that Gary Gates preaches and has always preached about, speed and keeping the ball moving around. And, you mentioned it with Petro, especially now I'd say with Bill Tierney retired, like Dave Petramala, it's like the most distinctive voice and presence kind of in the men's lacrosse world for many, many years. So like just him not being in the room changes a lot. What did you make of this John O'Derna hiring? He was at Manhattan, was the head coach there last year. Well, what kind of sense do you get from him as, he's a young up-and-comer and stepping into a big spot here?
That's exactly the word that I would use to describe it, and it was reinforced when I visited Cornell and Hobart and Penn State. Just, coaching is so much a young man's game, and the youth brings a combination of kind of understanding how to meet the players where they are, speak the language that they are used to hearing, and the reason that you're better acquainted to do it is because it's closer to the language that you yourself are used to hearing. And so, I was really fond of John and was impressed by the work that he had done in Manhattan. I thought it was a logical choice in many respects. I do think that it's starkly different, potentially a 180-degree opposite from the approach that Dave Petramala brought to that defense. And I think the biggest thing is simplification. And John said this after practice, that was one of the things that he was trying to work on. If there were times last year when defensive players were, thinking about 4, 5, 6 variables at once, he wants to reduce that to 1 or 2 variables at most. And so he was working on how to communicate that with the group and how to give the guys the tools to take ownership for their own defense and their own defensive performance.
Yeah, we had Will Markin here a couple weeks ago for a thing we were doing, and one, he's huge as a goalie, but two, I think he echoed exactly what you're saying, Terry, about simplification and getting the communication going and all that stuff. As Terry Foy is with us, we're talking some Cuse lacrosse here in the Orange football bye week. Good time to check in here in the midway point of fall ball, and here we are, year 2. Joey Spallina has got his younger twin brothers with him now. What do you make of Joey getting ready? He had a monster freshman season, but now it's on him, right, Terry? He's got to be one of the best players in the country this year.
For sure, and I think that the biggest thing is the fact that he played box lacrosse with the Orangeville Northmen all summer. And we spoke about it, and he talked about a combination of the physicality. Basically, it's easy to run through the middle of the field lacrosse defense when you don't have to worry about getting jacked in the back the way you do whenever you play box lacrosse. And then also just the combination of, space from a stick protection standpoint, from a catching standpoint, and how precise you have to be when you throw the ball. And I think that's the first thing. It's just his own natural growth, progression, development in terms of the speed at which he can play and how his skill is even more honed and refined. But the other thing I do think is going to be really important is Christian Millet's arrival, because last season, the majority, if not most of the passing and assist-making burden fell on Joey's shoulders. And I think that was one of the reasons that by the end of the year, you saw a Syracuse offense that was, for lack of a better word, a little bit predictable, where it was, bang it through X and Joey's going to attack the backside. I think that Christian Millet's presence allows, Joey to essentially throw back to the wing if that's where Christian is, or allows him to play on the wing and allow Millet to be that guy that redirects the offense through X, or they can both be at X and either run 2-man games or be an outlet for each other. And so I think the variability, the variety, the versatility has way more opportunity to be taken advantage of this year And I think that's going to be the second element of his game that you're going to see strong progression from.
Yeah, and hey, we know Finn Thompson. He led that box league up there in the summer in scoring. I know you tweeted about Trey Deer, the incoming freshman here. It sounds like this guy's the real deal, huh, Terry? That Trey can come in and contribute right away.
I've gotten to spend a fair amount of time with Trey over the course of the last 6 months, and one of the things that really stands out is that, yeah, he's skilled and he's got the physical tools, but he really has a different sense and a different presence than, a lot of players of his age and with his background. He is really mature, and I think that how that all meshes together and allows him to find a role on the team is going to be really compelling, and it's going to be a big part of the story for this Syracuse offense. I mean, you didn't even mention Owen Hills, who was one of the most exciting players 2 years ago, and then obviously you got to figure out how that meshes in with Stevens and English and some of the other middies that did make contributions last season. You get to 9 guys, which is pretty, the top 9, the first 2 midfielders in the starting attack is kind of considered to be the core of your offense, and outside of that top 9, you're kind of looking for guys to inch in roles, whether it be on extra man or maybe you run out of third midfield a couple times a half. There's more talent than there is available opportunity on this roster, and I think it's going to manifest in a really good team and a really good season.
All right, well, that is what is called a good problem to have. Always looking forward to LAC season, Terry. I'm sure it'll be here before we know it, but thanks for hopping on for a few, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon, okay?
Of course, Brian. Appreciate it. All right.
Terry Foy is the CEO of Inside Lacrosse. Hey, a little football bye week. We get a little lax talk. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Looking forward to it. It's year 3 for Gary Gatling. All right. It's been a little bit too long since we've seen the lax playoffs around here, so here we go. But good excitement there from Terry of what we should be looking forward to this spring. This will be the spring of 2024, and then 4 years after that, we can look forward to watching lax in the Olympics. That'll be something, I think. Maybe not, or we can just go back to watching track and swimming. Either way, cool for lacrosse to get included with the 5 rings coming up in 5 years. With that, we'll take a break. We'll check in on the Orange football bye week when we come back. What's the quarterback up to? Check it on that. Phone line's open as well, 315-437-7644 for ESPN 44. Back after this, QSportsTalk.com, ESPN